Hi, I'm Bruce Burke. We're back and doing some more interviews with some of the people that are going to be participating in the upcoming Fin+AI 2024 conference. Um, Today, I have with me Sarah Baldeo. And Sarah is the founder and CEO of ID Quotient Advisory Group. And Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about ID Quotient Group and what you do?
Sure. Thanks so much, Bruce, for inviting me to speak to you. So ID Quotient was founded 14 years ago. My background is as a neuroscientist and artificial intelligence application architect. So I was in neuroscience. I was on the path to become a neurosurgeon and doing my thesis studies. And I had this epiphany and I said, I don't think I can go to 8 years of medical school and still have a good time. So I transitioned into application architecture, programming, development, and I got scouted by a risk model algorithm design company that designed all of the underwriting and risk models for one of the biggest banks here in Canada. And 14 years ago, ID Quotient was born out of this idea of how do we leverage neuroscience to build better customer experiences, to leverage innovation, digital transformation, and of course, artificial intelligence. And so most of our clients are in banking, retail, or government services, where over the past 20 years, we've worked on everything from how do we modernize underwriting loans applications, how do we build out better customer personas, leveraging data, how do we do away with a million people stamping forms to go through a banking process or any kind of a workflow. And over those 20 years, I've also become a TED speaker. So I have the great privilege to talk to some of the biggest Fortune 100s all over the globe on how do we enable people to upskill with artificial intelligence, and how do we do away with a lot of the fear that is around adopting new technologies.
Yeah, I just read, and it's in our newsletter that went out today. I don't know if you're a subscriber yet. We'll make sure you are. The company is, I'm not sure how to pronounce their name. It's IPSOS. They do an annual AI monitor report, and they were quoting some statistics, and there seems to be some sentiment of reluctance to uptake it, right? A little bit, right? It seems to be like hovering around the 30, 32, 35% mark is where it seems to be hovering. And I think that would be true of almost any subject or any sentiment that you're looking for when you're talking to business people. Not everybody's going to agree. But in getting uptake, right? You're dealing with companies, they're implementing new systems, they're implementing new services, they're rolling out things that are totally foreign to their employees and to their customers and to prospective customers. How do you get buy-in? How do you help them get buy-in from either their employees or their customers?
So I think, Bruce, what happened in probably the past, I would say 24 months, is that companies decided, oh, ChatGPT came out in November of 2022. And then all of a sudden, this was going to revolutionize the way they used it in sales, marketing, operations, finance, and human resources. And so companies were very, very gung ho and excited around how they could actually reduce the amount of employees that they had, and they could leverage robotic process automation. In the past 12 months, and so there's two companies that have been reporting on upskilling and user adoption, Ipsos Reid and Gartner. Both of them seem to have taken the view, and I can say anecdotally that this corresponds to what I see with our clients at ID Quotient. Now it's not so much about jumping into building these experiences and building these modernization protocols. It's now just about informing their employees about what artificial intelligence is and what it does. The biggest challenge that I see, and artificial intelligence is not new, it's been around since the 1950s. What's new now is we have access to media. We have access to propaganda. And so there's this huge proliferation of fear mongering that AI is going to replace everyone and we will find ourselves in some kind of a futuristic Terminator movie with, machines taking over everything. So I find that what's really crucial when I'm talking to audiences is to just give them a lexicon of accessibility to understand what is the difference between artificial superintelligence, artificial narrow intelligence, artificial general intelligence. It's really about enabling them with the terms and the verbiage that they need to have conversations, because it's not the first time that jobs have been replaced. And I often say to people, if we look at industrial revolutions, this is the fifth industrial revolution. At the inflection point of every industrial revolution, 30 to 40% of jobs get automated. Guess what? 200 years ago, we just didn't have Twitter or X or social media to complain about it. There used to be a person that walked down the street and threw little pebbles at windows to wake you up as an alarm. That guy doesn't have a job anymore.
No.
There was somebody who used to bring you fresh milk. That doesn't exist anymore. And so it is very common that there is this cyclical nature of refreshing jobs. I think that what we're seeing now with people is this fear around, if my repetitive job is replaced, what do I do then? And it's really about saying to people, if you don't have to, I'll give a really good example in banking. If you're opening a bank account and you don't have to have a person that looks at a human being's driver's license and compares that to what they manually filled out on a paper form to apply to open a checking account, that's not taking your job away. If that's your whole job, that's not a very exciting job. What people should actually be focused on is
True.
Artificial intelligence is not designed to take the jobs that human beings love doing. It's designed to take the jobs that they hate doing.
Yeah.
And so I often ask this question, before I give a keynote or before I give a talk, and I say, if you've been at a company for 5 years, can you say that the role description, the job description has never changed in those 5 years? If that's true, I would challenge anyone to say that their job description has not changed in 5 years. And that's exactly what artificial intelligence does. That's exactly what the internet did. That's exactly what cell phones did and email did. It's just this particular narrative around artificial intelligence is that it's new and it's here to take people's jobs and widen the wealth gap. But I think 99% of that is erroneous information. And it's really about empowering people to find the ways that they could use AI to actually automate the repetitive tasks that take way too much of their time, particularly in finance.
In my case, cellular displaced my job of selling international long distance for a facilities-based carrier. In my case, AI essentially gave me a new position when I planted my flag and I said, hey, I'm going to do this Fin+AI show, right? And so it's all about how you embrace it and how you react to the changes that are going around with you. You've got a role. I mean, you cannot. One thing, if you're working in the technology business, if you're working in the finance business, if you're making cars at Elon Musk's factory, the guys that used to make the first model, whatever it is, the Model Y or the Model S, they're no longer making them. The robots are now making them in the gigafactories, right? So, everybody's as technology progresses, things are going to go by the wayside and new technologies are going to come in. And you just got to look to the future, right? And you got to try and be ahead of the curve, or at least with the curve, at least ride the crest of the wave, right? You've got to move, But so tell me more about what your company actually does. It sounds like you've done all kinds of projects, but everybody kind of specializes and has their thing that they're best at and that they probably get called on for the most? What's your forte in the business?
So generally, clients will come to us and say, we have a workflow process for example, a bank will say, we need help with our KYC AML processes to mitigate fraud because we've noticed in the past 4 years that we have an increase of bad actors and threat actors that are utilizing bank accounts for money laundering, as an example. And they'll tell us, here is our application infrastructure. We have 300 different systems that are all disparate, that we have double key entry issues, we have human error issues, the systems are not connected. Can you come in and do a gap analysis and see between the application program interfaces where there's a lack of connectivity, where there is a significant amount of error? What is happening to take so much time for us to onboard new clients? This is very common for a bank to do this. And then my team will come in and say, okay, we're going to do an audit. We'll do an audit of your application infrastructure. We'll determine where there's redundancies. We'll make recommendations and say, you know what, you should rationalize or sunset 30% of these tools that are just representing technical debt right now. And some of that is retiring those systems. And it's the actual implementation of saying, okay, we're going to retire these systems. And the other part of it is actually building new applications. So building new user experiences and user interfaces for the front end user. So a bank, we have a really great banking client that said, we want to leverage biometrics. We want to leverage biometrics and optical character recognition for opening new bank accounts for commercial banking. We have business owners. We need to be able to validate who the business is. We need to be able to collect all of their notices of assessments for taxes. And we need to be able to, within 24 hours, open a bank account. And so that's a very common situation that ID Quotient would get asked to come in and from, as they say, soup to nuts, look at the technical system architecture, identify all of the areas where the company is often spending a significant amount of money operating these systems that nobody uses anymore, make recommendations on how they can build out better integrations between those applications. And in many cases, say, now the front end user is not a developer, is not a programmer. How can you build this technology in a way that it's easy for someone who's not a Python developer or doesn't know JavaScript? Can you build it in a way that it's easy for them to utilize it? And that's all part of what's called robotic process automation. So, for banks, it's very common that they say our objectives are to mitigate fraud, to get accounts open faster, and to stop spending millions of dollars on systems we don't use. Or they'll say, we have somebody that opens accounts and they have to log into 12 different systems. How do we fix that problem? And so it's really about, if we step back from the technology, so myself, I'm a programmer, I'm a developer, and that's how I really built out the intersection between taking a neuroscience framework with my group of consultants and saying, if you understand the neuroscience of how people make decisions and how they utilize applications, you can build better applications that are easier for a non-tech person to use.
Being a programmer, and I didn't know this about you, I had no clue you're a developer. I have a lot of friends that are developers. I saw a post the other day. I don't remember what social network it was on, but it said the number one language in coding now is English. Yep. So as a programmer, now the GPT can do it, right, for you. And there's a lot of no code environments now that you can essentially drag and drop elements, I guess. I've never really worked with one. But as someone who's coded and learned to code and has probably written elegant code as opposed to inelegant code, right? What is your take on the GPT writing it or no code environments?
So So I do quite a lot of mentorship. So I was on the advisory board at UCLA for women in tech and women in leadership. I guest lecture at several universities in the US and here in Canada. My number one piece of advice to people that are doing a Bachelor of Tech is if you can learn code, if you can learn Java, C++, or most people now will have a tendency to learn Python. The importance of learning it is not to actually code. The importance of learning it is to understand how applications are architected and built and how data moves between systems. That is what you need to learn. And if you can learn that, and you can learn that in a way that you can communicate to a CFO, to a CEO, to a chief HR officer, that is what is useful. And so I do agree that a lot of people say coding is dead. I agree that coding and writing out code yourself, my team has built some really cool applications for the likes of Uber and Google. What's most important is that you can convey the purpose of the tool, of the app. If you can't convey the purpose of the tool, then I often use this phrase. You can be the smartest person in the room, but if nobody knows what you're saying, it doesn't matter. And that is the case with programmers and developers. So what we've seen I was at Deloitte as a managing director. I was at CGI as an innovation partner. I was a big part of the digital identity team at Deloitte when I was there. And so my observation is, yes, there's a significant amount of low code, no code tools that you can use. Normally, you would not use ChatGPT for that. You would use, for example, Microsoft Azure. So if you're using Microsoft Azure, you could create a SQL code generator for you. You can use AWS. AWS has a code generator. It generates code for you. And the goal, again, is not to replace people or to say that we don't need programmers and developers. Because let's say you gave AWS code generator a series of prompts and you said, here's what I want to achieve. Here's the data workflows that I need. And here's the outcomes and deliverables. Here's the code. If you didn't have someone who understood how to read code going through it, it might be a little bit difficult for them to do any checks and balances. So I would say, yes, being able to articulate, and I often observe this with programmers and developers, they're really good in the engine room. If you put them with a bunch of other engineers, they can all speak to each other. But once you put them in a boardroom, they can't communicate what they're trying to achieve. And the board members can't speak code. And so what I believe is it's not necessarily code versus English. It's something in between. It's being able to translate between these two stakeholder groups effectively to build something that people use. I'll give you an anecdote. I remember we were working with Uber, and a few years ago, Uber had a very significant issue with a series of assaults that was happening with drivers. And they were really getting to the point where they didn't think they could IPO. Insurance companies were no longer going to underwrite the Uber policies. At the time, I worked at a very large consumer reporting agency that basically did the due diligence for Uber and took all the documents from applicants, ran criminal checks, ran driver's checks. Everything was done manually. Every single thing was faxed in or emailed in, and there was a group of people who sat down and they looked at the application and they looked at photocopies of driver's licenses and they made sure that they were the same. This was not that long ago. This was about 5 years ago. And so I got together with my team and I said, okay, we need a better process to do this. Why aren't we using biometrics? Why aren't we using optical character recognition and liveness detection? I want to architect a workflow that any human being could go through to get their data over through to Uber. And we as the consumer reporting agency can just send this off to the motor vehicle records divisions in every state, in every country. where Uber operates, where we can validate that the person who's applying is the real person, where we can validate with, the different police departments that they don't have a criminal record, that they're not a danger to the public. The biggest mistake in the first iteration of this process is we built it as developers. We built it as if we were the ones that were going through the process. And I remember at the time I got very frustrated and I just created the wireframes by myself. And I went to my CEO. I said, here's the wireframes. Here's how it's going to work. It's not rocket science. What could go wrong? And we beta launched it with a group of potential applicants for Uber. We didn't really realize what people were going to do. And so there was one particular gentleman. So somebody would sign up. They would need to take an auto capture of the back and front of their license. And then they would need to have a capture of their face. And you would think that they would just follow the instructions. They did not. And so people, these prospective drivers I remember there was one gentleman, he went through the liveness capture, and liveness capture tracks. Are you blinking? Are you moving in relation to the background? It takes a series of photos throughout the workflow and make sure that you're a real human being. It has a photo border detection, to make sure you're not taking a photo of a photo. So this gentleman captures a photo of himself, and for some reason, he didn't like the photo. For whatever reason, he didn't like how he looked in this photo. He presses photo recapture. He gets another picture on his iPad, and he takes a photo of a photo on another device. And obviously, he failed the authentication process. And so I sat down with my developers and I said, we are developers and we're application architects, and we don't realize that the people that are using this they're not developers. So the instructions we give them, the prompts we give them, the explanations we give them, we need to use accessible language. We need
Super
to be
simple.
very, very simple. And this was, I think, so Uber ended up buying this technology and this application. Google ended up buying it as well for all of their contractors. So when you get a Google contractor, what I built is what they use. But the best lesson for me is I need to be able to speak and build experiences for people as if I was not a technologist, as if I wasn't a neuroscientist, because I could build the best customer experience, but I'm not building it for me. I'm not the customer.
Yeah. I was at an event recently, and at the lunch break, we were at somebody's high cocktail tables with the usual, the lunch in the box thing, right? And they asked me, they were all investors that I was at the table with, and it was, guys were pitching their companies, and they're like, in your estimation, like, what did you see this morning, right? Like, give us a synopsis. I said, the problem is most of these people that are doing these startup companies most of them are engineers. They're not salespeople and they're not marketers. And they spend so much money making the product, by the time they actually have the product finished, they don't have any money to market the product, and or they don't know how to sell it because they're engineers, right? And they don't know how to talk to people. They don't know what the buttons are that people, that you got to push to buy and sell, right? So, but a real question here of this is, would a bank, an insurance company, an enterprise organization, that's a large enterprise, would they use a code that was generated by a GPT or a no code stuff for mission critical stuff? Are they going to use that kind of stuff?
They already are.
They already are.
They already are.
Is the stuff secure enough? Is it writing good code? Is it does it output?
Yeah. I mean, it's writing better code than people. So most of the issues that happen with backend infrastructure are because of bad code. that a human being has written. If you look at the SQL code generators, for example, that Microsoft Azure can spit out, it's great code. It functions. It's
It's elegant code.
functional.
I know some programmers, and I understand the difference between
Yep.
something that's elegant, like Stripe. It's like what, 6 lines of code or something like that. It's supposed to be, right, and because it's well written, right, and it's
I think most of the issues that happen with applications being integrated is that the data elements between APIs are not effectively mapped. That's most of the issues. So in Canada, there's a company called Interac. Interac is the digital payments processor that every single bank uses here. When we want to send money to another person, we don't have a Zelle. There's no Zelle in Canada. You can't use Zelle. It doesn't work. You email somebody money. The biggest issues that happen with insurance companies, that happened with banks, is always fraud. Always fraud. It's always the fact that their know your customer, their KYC process doesn't have enough what's called LOAs. So in banking and insurance in the US, Biden, a couple of years ago, passed something called the Digital Identity Act. And the Digital Identity Act was all about building out verifiable credentials that a person had ownership of. So when you think about, you have issuers, you have verifiers, and you have customers. An issuer would be the agency that issues your social security number. Then a verifier might be a bank. A bank wants to make sure that that's a real social security number. And a holder is the person. So most of the issues that happen with insurance companies when they're trying to underwrite a policy, or they're trying to validate a claim, or with a bank when they're trying to determine if they should give you a loan, are because of fraud, are because of threat actors, are because somebody uploads a credit report that was manipulated. Those are the issues that happen with functional workflow processes. It's not the code that's not working. It's the fact that they don't have enough checks and balances to identify the fraud. And the same thing happens in government. So during COVID, there were tons in Canada and the US, billions of dollars that were given to companies to float them through COVID when there were closures in different states. Florida, I flew down to Florida a bunch of times. Florida was not closed, but New York was, for example. Billions of dollars were given to companies. What happened? Unscrupulous people opened up all kinds of numbered companies, and they would just have slightly different things different, right? They would have their address different. They would have the company name different. Maybe they would use one of their kids as the primary director. And so there was quite a lot of fraud. What happened is government agencies in the US and in Canada, they were in such a rush to do something to generate economic prosperity. They didn't build out effective KYC models to identify, oh, yeah, that's the same person applying for 6 different business grants. It wasn't even money that they had to pay back. And so these are where I see the problems with financial services and artificial intelligence. Every single time, it's fraud. It's fraud, it's fraud, it's fraud. And it's not that difficult to put in a biometrics verification. It's not that difficult to start saying, how could we use Hyperledger and blockchain more effectively? I remember I was talking to a couple of state GSAs that are clients, and I said to them, when people are applying for business loans to float themselves through COVID, basic thing, do a liveness detection. Make sure that there's a human being on the other end of it, and it's not the same person applying 6 different times. Or maybe look at the address. Is the address the same for every single application?
Yeah.
The name of the person is different. And they said, didn't think of that.
Is it 1542 and 1544, right?
You know,
you're talking a lot about biometrics. I was friends with one of the designers of the company. It was called Authentic. It was here in Florida. It was on the other coast that Apple acquired, where they got Apple ID. That wasn't an Apple invention. That was about 50 patents that they acquired. Authentic, which was a Florida-based company. F. Scott Moody was the CEO. He's now doing a health startup. But I was there when Apple came on their they were having their quarterly, right? And they're having a little celebration downstairs. And I went over to visit the designer. They had developed a system whereby you could log into multiple social medias. This was your Facebook. This was your LinkedIn. This was, you know, each finger essentially was a thing. And this was back before they, the biometrics in Apple, I think, came with iPhone 7 or 6, I forget. But they were doing stuff for all the other companies there. They had a lobby display of, you know, even the old candy bar phones, you know, having them like on the space bar and stuff like that, you know, the power button, you know, that's very popular for biometrics, right? And that stuff that technology is really, 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 really refined now and very hard to fool and duplicate and rip off, especially the face metrics. I think that can still be kind of easily deep faked, you know, but a fingerprint is really hard to do nowadays. You know what I mean?
I actually have observed in most of the RFPs for government solutions, or DoD, like the Department of Defense solutions, they're typically looking at what's called a level of assurance 3 or 4, which means that it couldn't be deepfake. So if we look at the data mapping on a person's face, there's something new now. It's called emotion AI. Emotion AI is this concept of being able to track human emotions on a face while a person is going through authentication. Most of the deep fakes that are created by like OpenAI, like the Sora videos, they haven't quite cracked expressing human emotion. And so there's an awkwardness. Number one, there's an awkwardness. Number two, there's not effective, it's called face mapping. And so when they look at the face mapping of the distance between eyes, most deep fakes look human, but they're not human because no person's face is symmetrical. And so there's actually these little, I recently was talking to a client. I said to them, you know, these are the top 10 things that you should look for if you want to make sure that you're not looking at a deep fake. Number one, if both sides of the face are symmetrical, it's not human because
No,
people don't have symmetrical faces.
no.
If you are looking at a deep fake and you're trying to determine, is it real because it's not blinking enough? Human beings blink. You also have to look at, it's called movement authentication. And so movement authentication is, if I look at you, Bruce, and I took a series of 100 photos, human beings, human beings are never,
The Apple thing, right? You know,
well, no,
when I flew on the plane recently, when I went up to Boston, right? They now have the thing where they enter your ID in the back of a machine, and then they ask you to, you know, put yourself in the frame, right? So it gets a picture of you, and then the machine compares it in real time. And I'm sure it's measuring more than just that face on your ID versus that face that they capture in the mirror. I know it's doing more than just that.
It's measuring data points on your face. It's measuring, very interestingly, the date stamp on your ID and the time that you are now. And there's an algorithm that says, okay, if this is actually the same person, here's the probability of a person aging. So if your passport says, I don't know, January 1st, 2024, and you're getting on a plane and it's June 25th, well, people age. And
Yeah.
so there are algorithms that say, within 6 months, here's how much a person should have aged. here's, if you're just looking at an authentication, like I recently was opening a bunch of accounts in Florida because I'm moving from Canada in less than 3 weeks. It's not easy to fake. People have a very good imagination. I think a lot of it is what they see in the movies, that's what they think is really happening. It's not that easy to fake a human being. It's not that easy to fake what's called liveness detection. And so most of the government RFPs, they're saying we want to have not just multi-factor authentication, because multi-factor authentication is really easy to fake. We want to track, is a person moving in relation to the background? Are they blinking? Are they aging in relation to the photo on the ID? Does the front of the ID match what's encrypted in the barcode on the back? That's actually pretty hard to fake. It's not hard to fake a front of ID. It's actually unfortunately, laughably easy. And my team discovered this because we work with a lot of casinos. So we work with most of the major casinos here in Canada, and a few in the US. And we discovered 9 times out of 10, somebody walks into a casino, they are fake. It's a fake ID on the front. It's hard to track. It's the barcode. That's why you always need to look at the barcode, decrypt the barcode, and make sure what's encrypted in the barcode matches what's on the front of the barcode. Usually that's how you track a fake ID. So I think there's a lot of behavioral components in different industries, like banking, like insurance, like gaming, like e-commerce for retail. There's a lot of neuroscience in the behavior of fraud. And when you merge together neuroscience of fraud and artificial intelligence with biometrics and robotic process automation, that's the secret sauce. That is the secret sauce that helps us to build solutions that are very difficult to fake. I think the biggest threat to cybersecurity is definitely quantum AI and leveraging quantum computers. I sit on a couple of cybersecurity councils, and I would say, so many companies that I speak to tell me that's 20 years down the road. That's 30. I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about quantum computers. No, there is a quantum computer that exists in Russia right now that's like a 50 qubit bit quantum computer. It can decrypt any banking backend system. It's not hard. And so I think when banks think about, there's 3 areas that they should focus on in finance. It's definitely fraud, underwriting, and customer personalization. Because a financial institution always is thinking about, how can I get more customers? And the way they can do that is leveraging generative AI to help them take their data and create customer personas and target those personas with the right products. So that's what financial institutions care about. Saving money, mitigating fraud, and making more money. Like, if we're very, very simplistic, that's what they want. And I think that right now, most financial institutions and insurance companies are still using manual processes in underwriting. Still today, yes, they use code generators for property and casualty insurance. They also are starting to use it on binding life insurance policies. I would say on the auto side is moving a little bit faster than life insurance for obvious reasons. Banks, I think, are using it a lot in setting up accounts, but they're not using it effectively on the fraud detection side. Most banks, if you talk to them about blockchain or hyperledger, they don't want to talk about it because there's been a lot of bad blood around NFTs and crypto, and they just think they're one and the same. I do think that adopting blockchain is the next step in banking. It's just facing a lot of pushback right now because of what's happened with crypto. They're not the same thing at all, but when you talk to COOs at banks, they tend to think it's the same thing. And
I just brought on we just brought on a young lady. She's coming to speak, and she has a new company. It's called Trust AI Chain. So it's a mixture of AI and blockchain. At a previous event I did, we had a woman who had a blockchain that she used in conjunction with the military to keep track of like every part that's in an F-16 fighter jet. Because as soon as one part's compromised, right, the whole thing's compromised, right? So authenticating insecurity is paramount importance, right?
That's the single greatest risk from a financial institution perspective, whether you're an insurance company, you're a bank, you're a credit union, you're a third party lender. That's the single greatest risk, that quantum computing can decrypt data. And one of the ways that data is encrypted, I was explaining this to one of my clients, and I said to them, do you know how you encrypt data at banks? Usually you do it with factoring primary numbers. And human beings can't really, like, if you think of what's a prime number is something that doesn't have multiples. Historically, you would take a computer and you would say to it, hey, can you factor a prime number? You're going to have two pieces of a puzzle to that answer. And the way we're going to do a data exchange is one computer has half the answer, the other computer has the other half. You match them up together, and that authenticates that you can now access the data. That's how we're going to encrypt data. A quantum computer can decrypt that in milliseconds.
Yeah.
And so that's really what's happening. Quantum computing is a risk to cybersecurity and the security around personal data and access to people's money. Quantum AI is this concept of AI right now has such a significant burden of computing power. That's the big of climate change. The climate change
cost
question is, how much computing power does it take to power artificial intelligence? Quantum AI is this concept that you can take AI chips and you can leverage computing power through quantum computing to just speed up the processing speed. And it's not far off. Like, it's within, I would say, 5 years, not 20 years, not 30 years. But I do get a lot of pushback from our financial institution clients that they don't think it's moving that quickly. And I do think it is.
It's moving very quickly, but it seems like the same guys that were saying, "Oh, we didn't need a website," like back then, right? They're thinking it's like the same thing. They're thinking this is going to be like a crypto 5-year run, right? Like the big crypto run that we had, right? I think they think this is going to be another one of those flash in the pan kind of technology things, right? Where it's a trend for a while and then everybody kind of goes another way, right? But I don't think so I heard a quote a while back, and you know more about this than I do. I'm a events organizer. Someone told me that when Moore's law stops, that's where quantum actually begins, right? Is that like the essence of it, or is there something more to that?
I think when you
because there's already quantum, right? And
quantum already exists. I think it has more to do with artificial superintelligence. So artificial superintelligence is this concept of sentient AI that is self-aware. There's a test. It's called the Turing test. So the Turing test was developed in the 50s to basically determine how human is artificial intelligence. ChatGPT obviously broke this. There's another company now. It's called Anthropic. Anthropic has something called Claude AI. Claude AI went through this Turing test and it passed with flying colors. And then they tried to put it through another test. And this is where you really see that inflection point with quantum AI. It's called the needle in the haystack test. And so the way the test works is you take a significant amount of text, like something like 50,000 characters, and you put it into a prompt. And the tool that Anthropic created is called Claude 3. And so you put it into the tool, and what you do is you test it to see if it can find the content that doesn't belong. And so they tried this with Anthropic's tool. And what they did was, interestingly enough, they put in 50,000 characters, they tried to put text that explained what is the best kind of pizza, which had nothing to do with computing or engineering or anything like that. But it was hidden. It was hidden text. And I think it was something like the best kind of pizza is goat cheese with arugula and caramelized onions or something like that, which it is pretty good, I have to say. And within milliseconds, the response didn't come back. I have detected the text that doesn't belong. The response came back. I think you're trying to trick me, or you're hungry. And so it was fascinating because that's the concept of artificial superintelligence, that what if we had AI that was self-aware? And so I think there's kind of two concurrent themes that are happening in artificial intelligence. There's self-aware AI and there's quantum AI. And when you put the two together, that is far more expedient than the pace of human learning. And I think that's what we're seeing. Like, I remember when I went to school and my teacher said to me, you can't use websites in your citations. That's not real. That's not real research, Sarah. That's not according to the APA guidelines. You can't do that. You have to go to the library. You have to get a book. You have to use the Dewey Decimal System. You have to put out the whole citation. Yeah. I have a 13-year-old. My 13-year-old uses websites as citations all the time. And so I think what's happening now is it's that quintessential, early adopter, mass adopter, laggard kind of bell curve that we've got. And this is the first time in human history when the pace of technology has outstripped the pace of human learning. That's the secret, I think, that we can admit that it's not a negative thing, that technology is moving so fast. There's this quote that said, by the time somebody goes through university, within a year, everything they learned would be superfluous. That is, I think, what we're facing right now, which isn't necessarily a negative thing or something to be afraid of. It really is just the reality of what's happening with artificial intelligence. And with quantum computing and with quantum AI, it's the pace at which it's evolving. That is really the inflection point that we're seeing.
So now if we could just build teleportation to make your move easier and you could just teleport that couch and all that stuff right into your new place, wouldn't that be wonderful?
You know what? I had a client in Chile that was looking at using 3D printing to bridge the gap on affordability for homes. If we could just 3D print all of our furniture, just like a massive 3D printer, and put it in our house in Miami and just 3D print everything. And then everything that we print would obviously be, you could compost it. It could be renewable energy sources. That's the gold standard for circular economy, right?
Yeah.
That's what we want in the future. I think we're a little bit away from that. I think that, honestly, banks, insurance companies, and government, I'll tell you the biggest pushback that my team gets, Bruce. The pushback is never how much is it going to cost. It's never that. It's never we don't have the budget, we don't have the money. The biggest pushback I get is how many jobs will be lost, Sarah? I get asked this question every single time we take on a big IT infrastructure change management project or bid. How many jobs are going to be lost? If it's government and they're looking at modernizing, social services payments, 60% of the jobs will be lost because you don't need manual processes. And so usually the pushback I get is that is not a good business story. Laying off 60% of the people is not a good business story. That's why we're not going to modernize right now, as opposed to we don't have the money or we could save so much money. And my pushback is if you don't need 60% of those jobs, why don't you take the savings and invest it in upskilling people? Send them back to school.
Yeah.
That might be a good utilization of all the money. If you had the salary of 60% of your people, what if you paid for them to go to school for a year so they could upskill on the technologies that they needed? That might be a great, recycling strategy. And I think that's the challenge we have now, that companies are very concerned that not everybody is able to upskill. That's
Yeah.
their biggest fear.
JP Morgan Chase announced a few weeks ago that all new hires from day one, they're going to start training them on AI, right? And I just read Morgan Stanley. They just did a big rollout. Goldman Sachs still is kind of internal facing. They haven't really put it out to their customers yet, but they kind of built it internally and tested it a lot internally rather than going out and getting a GPT or something like that. That's which kind of rolls right into my next question. In a lot of these projects, and I just attended a SME forum this morning. Some of the neobanks coming out of Southeast Asia, Time, and some of the other ones, right? And I asked them all this question. In building out these new AI innovations and these new data applications and all these new services and neobank services and cryptocurrency and all this stuff, right? Are they buying or are they building?
Most clients, and I would say a year ago, if you asked me this question, I would say 50% are building and 50% are buying.
Okay.
Now, if you ask me that question, interestingly, in telco, there's a huge telecommunications company here. They also operate in the US. They spent a year trying to build conversational AI tools for customer service, a whole year. And then they turned around and they bought it. And so I would say now, if companies are early on in their journey, they're realizing 30% of them are trying to build and 70% are buying. And so I think we're seeing a bit of a shift. I think a year ago, companies were saying, well, we have all this human capital. We have all these engineers. We have all these programmers. We have all these developers. We need to get some ROI on these people that we're paying. We might as well have them try to build these tools. Now, and I think we saw this very recently with IBM. IBM has stopped hiring developers and programmers. And so I think that's the shift that you're seeing. You're seeing that's why there's so many layoffs in technology consulting. That's why you're seeing there's so many companies that are reducing their headcount in technology companies like IBM, because they realize that it's much cheaper to just buy someone else's intellectual property than to reinvent the wheel yourself. Because after you spent a year on research and development, all that money is down the toilet now. So I think that's the shift that's happening. If I look at, I think in Asia, so in Asia Pacific, if I look at some of our clients in Singapore, they are light years ahead of North America in open banking. They also have the benefit of not being, they don't need to adhere to the same banking laws and regulations that we do here. So if we look at some of the open banking institutions in Japan, there's no AI regulation in Japan. Nothing. Everything goes. In Canada, we have the Artificial Intelligence Data Act. In the European Union, same thing. you have an artificial intelligence data act. In the US, you have an AI data act, but it's evolving and evolving and evolving. I think one of the benefits that banks and institutions in Asia Pacific have is they're not subject to these regulations. And they don't have as many laws around monopoly. So in Canada, one of the reasons that we only have 6 banks is because we have all these laws that prevent other banks from opening up.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
actually is antithetical to what you want in banking. You want competition. You want innovation. You don't want this, I don't know if you've ever read this book, Bruce. It's called Blue Ocean Strategy.
Yeah.
By Kim and Mayborn. And so what you get is you get a red ocean of sharks all fighting with each other, and you don't get any innovation or creative disruption in banking because of all these compliance regulations. I'm not saying that we don't need responsible AI and we don't need ethics and compliance models. We do. I just think that the pendulum has gone a little too far one way or the other. And the pendulum now is very motivated by fear. It's very motivated by wealth creation and worrying about, are we gonna put somebody's wealth at risk? And so I think that's why we find a lot of these innovative solutions coming out of Asia Pacific, coming out of Singapore, coming out of Japan. When we think about open banking, the concept of open banking would render superfluous all retail banks. Why do I need a retail bank if I'm totally in control and I can move my money and I can move my money anywhere that I want and do anything that I want with it, and I don't need a brick and mortar financial institution? Open banking is the biggest threat to the banking world. And I think some banks have embraced this concept, and they've embraced giving a lot of ownership and control to customers. And other banks are just saying, no, our greatest argument against open banking is it's not secure. Your money is not secure. But then we observe in the news kind of these situations with SVB, and it's, well, where is my money secure? If my money is not secure at banking institutions, then I would probably want to control my own money. So I think, when I look at what's happening with neobanks and open banks in Asia Pacific, the day that North Americans can open bank accounts overseas, there's going to be even more competition here in North America. And it's one of the things I actually admire about the US, that there's a reason there's not just 6 banks. There's an encouragement of competition, and that competition pushes innovation. Whereas here, you get basically one hand of choices of where you want to bank.
Well, I think the problem goes back to that old problem. Are you legislating towards innovation like the Singapore MAS does, right? Like Singapore MAS is legislating to support innovation, whereas it seems like in the U.S., the legislation is to support regulation, right? It's more geared towards regulation and fines and penalties and sanctions and that kind of stuff, rather than, hey, let's try and figure out how we can write this law so it actually supports innovation, right? And yes, it's more difficult, but other countries are doing it. Case in point, Singapore, right? Their MAS just released a whole new guidelines yesterday. I can send it to you. The GLA. I don't know if you saw that on the right. We're not putting anything out like that. The U.S. government's not, the Federal Reserve's not putting out guidelines like that, right? And they're like, this is it, right? This is it moving forward. Everything's on this, right? That's in their country, in their world, right? So, we need to look at those countries that are doing that kind of stuff and say, hey, can we do that, right?
especially if in North America we want to continue to hold the lion's share of power and wealth. And
Yeah.
so when we look at Asia Pacific and South Asia, and we think about economic prosperity, we think about the leverageability of the US dollar and how it controls markets right now. If we do not move towards innovation, then there's an expiry date on that power, which is, there's many views as to who should control what and why they should control it. But I do agree with you that if you try to, most of this legislation is written by policy analysts, unfortunately. And policy analysts are not always the most innovative, and they're very much focused on mitigating risks without balancing that with innovation. And so I know in Canada, what the federal government has started saying that before legislation can be passed, technologists, neuroscientists, behavioral scientists, fraud analysts, they all have an opportunity to contribute to legislation before it's passed. In the US, that doesn't happen as frequently, but the federal government here in Canada has started doing that, and it's now become mandatory for
That's nice.
legislation on artificial intelligence. Because here, I think the federal government just invested something like $3 billion into AI innovation. In the United States, it's like $3 trillion. And
Yeah.
so if you're putting trillions of dollars into AI as an ecosystem, then definitely we shouldn't personally, I do not think that policy analysts should be holding the reins on innovation and how AI can be utilized. I think that's a very slippery slope, and it can handcuff us and put us at a severe disadvantage against those markets that you and I were just talking about on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's not exactly the best decision,
Yeah.
and we do need to compete with those markets on an even playing field, and we can't be handcuffed from doing that by arbitrary policy. If it's policy that makes sense and protects us and protects consumers, that's great. If it's policy that is, we've always done it this way, if it's not broke, don't fix it, that's not good policy.
No, that's why nothing ever gets invented. That's why we can't have nice things, right? Um, I don't want to keep you all day, but I do want to say I do want to ask one last question. I want to be respectful of your time in doing AI and in doing this. The inception point seems to be for a lot of companies, let's start with customer service, right? Let's get us a chat bot, or let's get us, let's get some personas mapped out, and let's start making some offers to personas, right, and that kind of thing. But that's really really low hanging fruit, almost falling off the tree kind of a fruit. In your estimation, and having done a lot of this stuff, what is the killer application for AI and blockchain and some of these technologies that we've been talking, biometrics, right? I know it's a combination, probably a four-pronged approach to the problem, but what's the killer application here?
I actually have noticed, Bruce, that a significant amount of companies in banking, telco, and retail, when they started building chatbots or they started exploring using generative AI or ChatGPT, there's so many different tools that they can use. They didn't want to test it out with customer service, actually. They wanted to test it out with internal customer service. So they started using it to modernize things like HR, onboarding new employees, recruitment, talent management. Companies, I think, see the highest return on investment capital from my perspective. And I was asked this question a couple of weeks ago by a big pharmaceutical client. They're headquartered in Germany, and they have a $17 billion market cap. And the CEO said, if we were going to put our money somewhere, where would we see the highest ROIC? I said, put it into finance. Put it into leveraging how you can have better cash flow conversion, how you can increase your retained earnings, how you can analyze your balance sheets and your income statements, how you can make better choices with capital expenditures, how you can think, okay, we need to reduce our SG&A costs by 20% year over year. You want to see the highest return on investment capital? Start with finance. Start with internal finance and how you're spending your money. And I would actually start there first, because if we look at the pits of money where companies spend the most amount of money, they spend a lot of money on trying to get new customers. But it doesn't translate into the amount of customers that they want to get necessarily, because they get customers, but then they have broken internal processes and they can't retain those customers. And so I typically will say to CEOs, whether you are in transportation, logistics, telco, retail, insurance, banking, pharmaceutical, it doesn't matter. You will get the most bang for your buck if you invest in deploying artificial intelligence solutions into your finance infrastructure first, before you go and have all these nice flashy banners for customer service.
Because the customers just want to talk to a real human being anyway. I mean, so
Yeah.
I know they want to get rid of all their low paying customer service positions, but really they should be getting rid of their high paying middle manager positions.
They won't necessarily. It's not a good news headline, is it?
No,
Right?
it's not.
It's not
But
sexy.
I think despite the kind of it seemed like this last week it's kind of been like a reality check, right? There's kind of been an overarching tone of a reality check about AI in the news this last week. I've seen a lot of, is it a friend or foe? Is it it's a great prospect, but also it's a great threat. It's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? I think that's kind of a light snapback to just the amount of trillions and billions of dollars that Microsoft and OpenAI and that whole thing that, kind of blew up real quick, right? It's just a little bit of a snapback. It's like, hey, these things aren't magic. Hey, these things aren't, like you said, they aren't sentient beings, right? They're this isn't the magic pill for society, right? We're not all going to be able to take the rest of our life off and the robot's going to do everything, right? I think it's a message. I've even put out I usually try and focus on the positives, especially when promoting a show. The last thing you want to do is put out a negative sentiment about the subject matter that you're talking about, right? But I think that there is some things that need to be discussed, and there is some issues that around AI that people, one, people need to be aware of the issues, right? And two, if you're not discussing the issues, then the sentiment only grows, right? Exposing the sentiment to light kind of helps it diffuse a little bit,
I think that if we just follow, they say follow the money. If we look at venture capitalists and private equity companies, so ID Quotient oftentimes will be asked to do the due diligence on a technology company. Venture capitalists will come to us and say, hey, this company is going through Series B. They want $5 million. Can you poke some holes in the science behind this? Like, should we give it to them?
Yeah.
Do you actually believe their total addressable market slide? Should we be sitting at their cap table? I think what's happening
before we give Frank $173 million for their student loan thing, right?
I think that what we're seeing in investor circles are now, you can no longer just put a nice slide with the word AI. How are you going to solve problems? How are you going to generate money and value creation? AI, AI, AI. That doesn't work anymore. What we're seeing in the latter half of 2024 in terms of headwinds in investor circles is they're really picking apart that TAM slide. They're really looking at due diligence. And I think when we look at a significant amount of companies in 2023 were not able to IPO because venture capitalists were sitting on cash. They sat on their cash and they wanted to maintain liquidity for obvious reasons. They wanted to mitigate capital gains tax for obvious reasons. In Canada, the capital gains tax just went up from 50 to 67%. So what you're seeing is a significant amount of innovation companies in Canada, companies that are in tech, are moving.
There's going to be a southern migration, huh?
There's a
Okay.
huge influx of companies that are moving to the United States and they're moving to Europe because of the tax infrastructure in Canada. What's happening with venture capitalists are also saying, if I gave a company, 3 years to achieve that year-over-year growth, if I didn't see that year-over-year growth, I'm collecting on my investment. I'm not extending that term.
Right.
And so you're seeing a lot of movement of money within investor circles that is now being pulled back into private equity and venture capital firms because they really want to avoid the penalties of capital gains in companies that were artificially inflated and that were overvalued. And so when I look at, I have clients have said to me, where should I use AI? You should use AI to do your DCF valuations. Why aren't hopefully you're not using multiples to do your valuations. For your DCF valuations, leverage artificial intelligence. Why are you not leveraging generative AI to look at your discounted cash flow evaluations for companies before you hand them money? So I think if we're talking about finance as a whole, venture capitalists and private equity firms are starting to use AI. They're starting to clam up and say, you can't just use the word machine learning models and we're going to hand you money. That's no longer the magic bullet. And so in the latter half of the year for, Q3 and Q4, I think we're seeing investors make decisions differently. They're definitely not asking. I don't think they're asking, is it friend or foe? They're asking, what do you really mean when you say you're using AI in this new intellectual property that you created? Number one, is it your IP or did you white label somebody else's IP? And 90% of the times when we do a little bit of due diligence and probing, my team discovers it's not really your IP. You just found some company somewhere overseas and you white labeled their biometrics tool. You white labeled their KYC AML tool. You white labeled their OCR tool. It's not even yours. Why would I pay for that?
Yeah.
You don't have any intellectual
You don't have
property.
any IP. It's not yours, really. It's somebody else's. And if I claim that it's mine by investing in you, and they come for me, right? They're coming for all my money, right? So,
I do see. Number one, to answer your question, I think that companies should focus on their internal stakeholders before they focus on their customer service and kind of, it's very good marketing. It's a very good news headline. Oh, we're modernizing our customer service.
yeah.
We're using AI in customer service. Well, your internal stakeholders are your most important customers because you could grow your market share by 50%, but you're not going to retain any of those customers if you have a broken internal structure, number one. Number two, when companies are investing in AI companies, I think they're getting smarter about due diligence. The ones who are being very careful with their money are really starting to probe a little bit deeper. So they're not asking the question, is it friend or foe? they're asking the question, what are you actually doing with AI in your intellectual property? Like we just had a huge conference here in Toronto called Collision.
Right. My friend Joey was there.
About 40,000 people go to this conference every year. Investors are really not getting the wool pulled over their eyes. It's not the magic bullet anymore. I went to Collision last year. Every single talk was about AI. Every single talk was about AI. There is another conference in Toronto that's called Elevate, and it's all about innovation and technology. Like 35,000 people come to that, 20,000 from the US. And I gave a keynote at that conference to 40,000, 35,000, 40,000 people. And the thing that we talked about was, how is using augmented reality and virtual reality actually changing the engineering of the human brain? Fundamentally, what is happening with the structures in the brain that didn't happen before? These are the kinds of conversations people want to have. They
I've got to introduce you to my friend Tracy, who's doing some stuff, some neurological stuff, more for helping people with disabilities and that sort of thing, right? He's developed some stuff. He was just at an event up in MIT for that kind of stuff. He'll probably be at the event. I'll make sure to introduce you to him. But I want to be respectful of your time. One last question.
Yes.
How can they get in touch with Sarah? If people want to reach out to Sarah and connect with Sarah, how do they reach you?
They can follow me on X. They can send me a message on Instagram at the Sarah Baldeo. They can go to my website if they're interested in having workshops on AI, which is www.sarahbaldeo.com. If they're looking for application architecture, if they're looking for where on earth do I start with my AI journey? How do I build better AI experiences? They can go to www.idquotient.com, or they can just shoot me a message on LinkedIn or find me at your conference.
And all the links for all those things that Sarah just mentioned will be in the description below the video here. So Sarah, thanks so much for your time. I want to remind you to hang around for 1 minute after I hit the stop record button, so we can finish uploading the footage here. But thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person and seeing what you're going to present at the show. I'm really excited to have you, and thanks to Matthew for bringing you in and introducing us to each other and all that sort of thing. So have a great 4th of July holiday. Stay safe. I know you're moving to Florida, but after you light the firecracker, throw it, because they don't down here.
Thank you, Bruce.
I'll say goodbye on that, and I'm going to turn off the recorder right there.